Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Rental Regrets. As always, I am your host, Victory Nub, and today we are looking at Bobble. Developed by Taito and published, depending on which version you're talking about, either by Taito or possibly Nintendo and possibly a company called Romstar. It's really specific to which console or platform that it was actually released on that you're talking about, who it was that actually published the game, but it was released in the United States on the NES version that we're looking at today in November of 1988. So this is a game that I played maybe one time in my entire life before I picked up a copy to look at as a part of Rental Regrets. And it's actually going to spur on a little bit of the conversation that we're going to have today while I'm playing the game, specifically about playing video games with your family, either close or extended. In this case, I'm probably going to focus mostly on playing with extended family. I do apologize in advance. I am a little bit under the weather, and this episode may end up being a little bit on the short side simply because I haven't been feeling too well. So the reason why I wanted to talk about that today is the game that we're going to be looking at here is a game that I ended up looking at that one time at a family member's house. And I didn't really have a close relationship with any of my extended family because they all lived in a part of the country that I didn't really go to much, simply because my parents were both employees of the government and they didn't have, tons of money to spend on airplane tickets so that we could go visit our extended family on a regular basis. Or at least that's how I understood it. It's possible they just didn't really want to see their family that much. The irony, of course, there is the fact that I have a lot of extended family. My parents were both part of the baby boomer generation. So in the case of my father's family, he had, I'm going to say it was 10 siblings. Or it's possible that it was just 10 kids in total. And my mother was part of 7 kids. So between them, they had, a lot of kids between the 17 individuals on both my mother and father's side. That would be my aunts and uncles. So there was, plenty of opportunity for me to actually play video games with my cousins, at least you would think. It turns out whether it was, I was born too late because I am the youngest member of my particular sibling group, that I didn't actually get to interact with some of the older cousins that would have been around at the time that the regular Nintendo was out and you could get games for it. But I do have a couple of memories, and this is one of the games that I'm playing terrible. Do I continue from where I'll be honest, I don't know much about this game outside of it's the first game, and the sequel is the one that we had done a Rental Regrets episode on already, Rainbow Islands. Anyway, yeah, I have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 cousins, and I don't know if I could name half of them. Because the reality is they all lived in another part of the country that we didn't see very often and don't really have much in the way of personal relationships with. Which sounds sad, but, it's just the way that our family was raised. So this particular game was one of a group of games that I had played at a family member's house, and this is going to be the common refrain in most of these stories, is the fact that it happened around Christmas time, because that's when my parents decided to go visit family, usually. We had gone over to their house, and there was an NES set up in the basement. That particular cousin, I believe he may have been 10 years older than me at that point, and he may have already moved out of the house because I don't remember seeing him at all that particular Christmas. But he had an old NES that he had some games for, and this was one of them. We've looked at a couple of other games and Rental Regrets as a result of that experience. We also looked at Kung Fu, which is the first time I had played it when we visited my family that year. Legend of Zelda, that may have been the first time I ever played that game, and then ended up picking it up years later. Oh, okay, you cannot rapid fire your bubbles, and I am doing terrible. Can I continue? Oh, yeah, I can. Okay, just continue there. And a couple of other games that we may or may not look at as part of rental regrets, just depending on gauging interest in this particular case. Excite Bike, I think, is the first time I played it, was when I was visiting family. How do I get to that? I guess I gotta climb. And it's awkward to say that you were playing with someone else's console while they were away, but, you know, ultimately, this wasn't by choice. I didn't just sneak down to their basement because I knew they had video games. I was actually, you know, advised, hey, if you're bored, I think, you know, your cousin has some video games. You want to check them out? And oh, look at that. I should have been doing that the whole time. Get out of here. On a subsequent trip to visit the same half of the family for Christmas a couple years later, we were at a big gathering. I think it was during New Year's because we had stayed a couple of weeks. And again, I was at a family member's house, and at the time, the Sega Genesis was available for people to purchase. And they said, hey, I think some of your cousins are downstairs playing Sega Genesis. I was like, oh, okay, I'll go check it out. At the time, they were playing Joe Montana football. Now, we've looked at John Madden football. I probably won't look at very many, if any, other football games, simply because even if they are good, I don't really care that much about sports games. They're okay. I've had some fun with some of them, but it's not a very extensive history. However, that particular visit, my cousin, I can't even remember which one it was. I think he might have been in the Marine Corps at the time. I was hanging out with a couple of other friends and or possibly members of the Marine Corps who were from the area that were on break. And they spent the 2, 3, 4 hours, however long it was, playing just Joe Montana football. And not only that, but the topic of discussion that particular day was about college football. Now, I have a passing interest in professional football. I have zero interest in college football. To make matters worse, they were talking about teams, since, I was visiting family in the Midwest. They were talking about Midwest teams in college sports. So I had absolutely no footing to offer any kind of commentary on what they were talking about that particular visit. So it was mostly 2 or 3 hours of them playing Joe Montana football, talking college sports, and at no point did anyone ask if I wanted to play the game. So that was a very memorable visit, but for bad reasons. And I never decided to go and check out Joe Montana football after that. I kind of had lost my taste at that point, what little of it I might have had for that particular game. That doesn't mean they were all bad memories. I did have at least one visit with some family where we had to help my mom, who was helping a family member who had passed away. And one afternoon, she had to take care of some stuff, and me and one of my 2 sisters were there with her as kind of like help her cope with the passing, because it was I believe it was one of our great aunts that had passed away. And we spent the afternoon with one of our cousins that we hadn't seen in 10 years or so. And he was absolutely a class act, very much a gentleman. He was very nice, very conversational with us. And we were all roughly the same age, so it wasn't like there was a divide between us and him. However, the thing that sticks out in my mind, and I'll give him credit because I never thought this would be the case with any of my family, he is the reason why I am a huge fan of Bethesda's video games, in particular the Elder Scrolls series. He spent a good chunk of that time when he realized that I was into video games talking about Morrowind. And at the time, he was talking about it, playing it on the Xbox, which I never owned. I did not own the original Xbox. You could also get it on PC, but I didn't really have a good quality gaming PC, I don't think, at that time. What few games that I did have on PC were probably 4 or 5 years old, and I didn't really do much to upkeep the computer and make sure that it worked, as well as it possibly could. He was very effusive with his praise about that game, saying, it was so open and talking about all the wild things you could do and picking up, exotic equipment and meeting all these weird characters and all these cool quests you could go on. And it's like, that sounds fun. I'm doing terrible now. At the time, me and my sister, because my sister didn't really play video games very much, so she didn't have much to offer to the conversation. We're just kind of, yeah, it sounds pretty cool. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. And, the truth is, he was just making conversation about one of the few things that we might have shared in common, because, again, this is a cousin we hadn't seen in so long that neither of us really knew anything about him, and he didn't really know anything about us. But, again, he could have just been an absolute jerk, not had anything to say to either of us conversationally. And he wasn't like that. He was very nice, and I remember that visit fondly for that very reason. Another visit, and this is kind of going backwards in time, when on the few rare occasions that family actually came to visit me and my family, because we were kind of the outliers. The majority of my extended family all kind of lived in the same area. It was my parents that moved away, but mainly that was because they both met while they were in the military. On the one visit that a couple of our family members made to where we live on the East Coast, I do remember playing a lot of Super Nintendo games that I had with one of my cousins. And I don't know if he had any or all of those. I didn't know you could hop on the bubbles. God, I'm an idiot. All right, so let me make some bubble bridges here to get out of here. Got it. Good thing there's no timer, because I'm doing terrible at this. In particular, the games that I remember playing with my cousin when he was here, I remember playing Donkey Kong Country. I think we played a little bit of Secret of Mana, which is a 2-player game, or 3-player if you had the multi-tab. And then I think Illusion of Gaia might have been one that we looked at a little bit, but that's an RPG, and it's very much a 1-player game. But, it was one of those things when we weren't doing, family in town visiting. Let's go to the memorials, and full disclosure, my 2 favorite words on the channel. I live in Northern Virginia, so if you're talking Northern Virginia, you're talking DC, and doing all the touristy things that you can do in DC, which usually involve visiting the monuments and Arlington National Cemetery, which is a very somber thing. But, that's one of the things that you end up doing when you visit this particular area. And in between doing that, I think we actually went to Virginia Beach. Oh, there is a time limit. Okay. Could you stop? Thank you. But in between doing those things, we did spend some time playing video games, and that's, kind of how it's how I relate to people, for better or worse. If we don't have anything else to talk about, it's like, hey, do you play video games? I mean, I have a YouTube channel playing video games, for goodness sake. Okay, get up there. Pop the bubble. There we go. But yeah, I hate to say that that's the majority of my memorable interactions with family members is through playing video games, but the reality is, don't have a lot of memories about interacting with extended family to begin with. And just the nature of living in another part of the country and not having a ton of... Whoa! Okay, I just skipped a bunch of levels. not having an opportunity to interact with my extended family very often. Oh boy. So I am seeing some items that I do remember being in Rainbow Islands, particularly all the fruit, but also a couple of power-ups like the shoes. That was definitely an item. I'm guessing I can jump up there from here. Oh! Good thing there's unlimited continues, because I don't think I'd get very far. And this game is supposed to have 100 levels, if I'm not mistaken. So I think it would be very difficult to beat the game without unlimited continues. And I say that and watch after the next, 3 deaths, it'll tell me I'm out of continues. All right, let's see if I can get this. Gotcha. Gotcha. No, what are you doing? Get up there. There we go. Not too worried about getting the items. So like I'm keeping a very high score running right now. And I think we've talked about this a little bit in the past about my time playing video games with family members. I was the big gamer in my particular family. That, oh, okay, don't touch those, I guess. That didn't mean that none of my family played them. Again, the first console that I ever spent money on and purchased was the NES, and that was a joint purchase between me and my 2 sisters, and they each picked up a game as a result of that purchase. Did any of them actually continue playing games after that? Kind of. My older sister does play video games a little bit, not a ton by comparison to me. And then the younger of my 2 sisters, who's also older than me, as awkward as that is to say, I'm the baby of the family. I don't think she plays any video games. If she does, it's like on mobile, which sounds dismissive, but the reality is, that's still video games. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but video games come in all forms nowadays. Oh, come on. I'm doing terrible here. And of course, in the past, I've talked about my mother being a big fan of the NES and the Super NES when I still had those consoles around. And I think what I ended up doing when I moved away to college is I ended up buying her an NES and a Super NES and leaving some of my games for her to play while I was away at school, so that she had something to play, because I knew she liked certain games. There were ones that she was a big fan of that quite often I wasn't really that big a fan of, or if I had been, I kind of wore out my interest over time. Like, she was a really big fan of Super Mario RPG. Now, I loved that game myself, but it was one of those things where I knew, well, I'll be done with college eventually, so I might as well just leave it here, and then, one day when I'm visiting, I could just go take the game back, because it's not like she's gonna notice if I take it. It's an 8, 9, 10-year-old game at this point. How many more times can she play the game and still have any interest in it? We did an episode on Super Buster Brothers, which she loved that game for some reason so much. She really liked Yoshi's Island. And I'm lukewarm on that game from my memory. I liked it okay, and I guess this was half of the point. I kind of really did not like the whining baby Mario every time Yoshi got hit and you lost the baby. That used to drive me absolutely insane, and I don't know if that was the reason why... I just died again. Dang it. The reason why I ended up not playing that game very much. Now, we are going to look at it, and I'm mulling over whether or not that may be worthy of a long play. in the future. Not saying it will be or won't be. I think it's heavily dependent on how much progress I can make in each episode. And if it's a fairly short game, and I don't remember it being the longest game in the world, if we could do it in like 4 or 5 episodes, I think that would be a worthwhile venture, is just knocking the whole game out in one shot, doing, like not a single 4 or 5 episode long play episode, but like, do it in all one sitting and record all those and then chop them up into the 1 hour episodes. Anyway, I think we've gotten enough of a look at me dying repeatedly in a game that probably some people are like ripping their hair out in frustration at how bad I am. Final thoughts on the game. It definitely feels like it's an arcade game. At its heart, it's pretty simplistic. You just fire bubbles at enemies. Once they get trapped, you have to actually step on them or bump into them to pop it and kill the enemy. There are some interesting power-ups that are laid out throughout the levels where you can get the bubble that kind of rushes you around. I'm guessing it's because there's water in the bubble, I think is what they were going for. The lightning bubbles, which I thought were hurting me, I guess they were another form of weapon that I could use against the enemy. All the power-ups that I remember from Rainbow Island, at least in shape, are there. Maybe not in function. And by that I mean like the shoes that you could get in Rainbow Islands, which doubled your speed, were here. However, diamonds, I think in Rainbow Islands, they actually helped you get to a secret level, and you would know your progress because it would spell it out in the bottom of the bar. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, but it didn't look like that was happening here, and I did pick up at least 1 diamond, I think. The 5-sided diamonds. I didn't notice a ton of other power-ups. The umbrella, I don't remember there being an umbrella in Rainbow Islands. There might have been, but you already were very floaty in Rainbow Islands, and this game as well. I think that the whole conceit there is it's the same characters. Once you beat Bobble, in theory, the dragons revert to their human form, and then in the sequel, you're taking on some new big bad as your human selves. Other than that, there weren't a ton of power-ups. It was mostly just chase down the enemies, shoot bubbles at them, and go down to the next level. Now, obviously, if you've played either game or if you've watched the Rental Regrets episode we did for Rainbow Islands, you're going in opposite directions. In this game, you're constantly descending down a shaft, vertical shaft, level to level. And in Rainbow Islands, you were going up levels constantly. You'd start on the ground, and then as the game progressed, you went up and up and up and up and up. And I think if you fell in that game, you could fall all the way back to the very bottom of the map. And it wasn't based on number of enemies you killed, it was based on getting to the very top of each level. And I don't remember if enemies respawned or not. I don't think they did. But honestly, it's been a while since we recorded that episode. I can't remember. But a lot of the functionality in this game is kind of reminiscent of that game, obviously. And, it's good, simple, mindless gameplay. Just bounce around, shoot enemies, pop them, go to the next level. As far as my regret, I don't know if I would have been terribly upset if I'd played this game the one time that I had visited my extended family and played it and never played it again in my life. I don't remember the game having a huge impression on me then, and I don't know if the game did today either. I mean, it was okay, and it made for a fairly easy game to talk over about, other stuff. But in the long run, this is probably not a game that I would ever find myself going back to willingly. And maybe 2-player would have changed my opinion on it, but I don't know. It didn't feel like there was a whole lot of meat there that I felt I needed to go back and get another course on, if you're using a bad analogy, or what's the word I'm looking for? Metaphor? Yeah, I'd say this is a regret, probably just picking it up today, because it was like, maybe it's just one of those games that we just don't look at. Add to that Excite Bike. I think that's one that I also played while I was visiting family, and it's okay, but I don't know if it's one that I feel a terrible compulsion to make an entire video out of, simply because it's just, there's not much to it. It's kind of a bare bones game. Kind of like this one. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of Rental Regrets. As always, I do appreciate each of you watching, and I will see you next time.